How's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio, and today we're putting Keith Bodnerchuk, the CEO of a small uranium explorer with assets in the Athabasca Basin called Cosa Resources, on the barbecue to see how well he cooks. Who's not here with us today, though, is your financial advisor. This is a broad discussion that's general and impersonal in nature. And most importantly, this is a discussion that will include a lot of forward-looking statements and hopes for the future about a high-risk exploration company. And the exploration business is a very risky endeavor, which means that you should only keep watching if you and your portfolio can afford to carry a lot of risk. And in addition, you should also consult multiple financial advisors, do a lot more research, and just never blindly trust people on the internet. I think that's a good life decision. That all said, Cosa Resources is a relatively new uranium exploration company. They listed last March, and they're currently trading at a market cap of roughly 14 million Canadian dollars. So that's 14. So that's 1-4. And they're trading on the CSE under COSA. The company has roughly 33.5 million shares outstanding with less than a 500,000 warrants, so virtually no warrants, and 3.5 million options for a total number of 37.5 million fully diluted shares. And it's currently trading at about 40 cents Canadian, maybe 41. A large part of this company's management team is also the same team that made the Hurricane discovery with ISO Energy. But they've been involved in a bunch of other discoveries and a bunch of other companies in the basin too, like NextGen, Denison, Consolidated Uranium, and so on and so forth. And that management now roughly owns 35% of Cosa Resources, with the CEO noting roughly 1.8 million shares. That would be about 5% of the company. Cosa has a large land package of over 140,000 hectares spread across no less than 6 uranium exploration projects in and around the Athabasca Basin would be the right thing to say here. So they're all over it, actually. It's in the north, in the southeast, and in the northeast part of the basin, I would guess. And they have they basically have some interesting looking rocks with some interesting geophysical properties that we'll talk about. All projects are 100% owned by the company, by the way. And Cosa also has a small copper exploration project right outside of the Athabasca Basin to the southeast, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe we're going to hear a little bit about it to see how that makes sense. And yeah, that all said, Keith, it's time for me to shut up, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me, Antonio.
What did I miss in that overview?
That was really good. I think, like you said, this is a new story, but backed by a team with a tremendous amount of success in the Athabasca Basin. Really, like you mentioned, we've had our fingerprints on majority of the past success stories in the basin in the past 15 years through NextGen, ISO, and Denison. I think it's important to note that, yes, we did list this company in March of last year, but we've really spent the last 14 months building out this land package, right? So we've got our heads down, controlling the burn, just piecing together a land package that made sense for us to really come to market here. And this is hence why I'm speaking to you, right? This is the first time we're really talking about the story as we prepare to start exploring our ground.
It seems like you have an interesting portfolio of projects. I'm looking forward to talking about them, but let's maybe first take it from there. But it might sound vague, but what is really the goal here? I mean, 6 projects, unique locations. Are you looking for, like, the next Arrow or the next McArthur River that you want to sell to a major, or are you looking for a deposit that, I don't know, you can bring into production yourself?
Yeah, I think really, obviously having past success at Hurricane and Griffin at Denison and stuff like that, we've started to develop what we feel is somewhat of a recipe to go after these deposits. We're really explorers at heart. I think we've tried to set ourselves up to go after that McArthur River size stuff, right? And that's hence the ground that we have. It's ground that's often been overlooked in the past. It's had less exploration than some of the areas right around the McArthur River, and it has a lot of meat left on the bone, right? It has potential for these elephant-sized deposits. And, we have a group that's competitive. They're hungry to make another discovery that's going to be bigger than Hurricane this time. And so that's what we've tried to do, is just set ourselves up to go after these areas where we think there, like I said, a lot of meat left on the bone and a lot of opportunity, a lot of room really to have these, large size deposits like an Arrow or McArthur River.
Why is that? Why is there a lot of meat on it? Like, why didn't anybody pick up those projects before you?
So I think, I guess speaking to Ursa, I would say specifically, it's along the Capel Bay Shear Zone. It is deeper into the basin. I think we're taking the approach that, where can we find this next great district? Obviously NextGen and Fission have that Patterson Lake area where they have that great district where they've had a ton of success. In the past, it was McArthur River and places like that where you have this big northeastern trend where it's almost like a string of pearls where you can go from McArthur down to Phoenix, down to Griffin, down to Key Lake. And so we took the approach, okay, so where's the next logical place for this next great district? And we decided that we had to head deeper into the basin, into this Capel Bay Shear Zone, right? It's the next analog really to that big long McArthur River trend. And so that's why we headed there. And I mean, I think in the past, obviously, groups haven't targeted that deep because they've had success, chemicals and stuff in and around McArthur didn't necessarily make sense. But as, competition increases in the Athabasca Basin, as the east side, continues to be explored extensively, there starts to be less and less room for those McArthur River-sized deposits in that area. Obviously, there's still chance, and there's probably a chance for hurricane-sized deposits. But really, if you're looking for that next great district, we think you have to go deeper into the basin. Hence why we ended up with the Ursa project covering that Capel Bay Shear Zone.
And just to clarify, when you say going deeper into the basin, what you're talking about is going sort of into the basin itself, not deeper underground. Although the type of deposit that you're looking for would generally be hosted sort of in the 800 to 1,000 meters depth, I guess.
Yeah. So the southwestern end of Ursa will be in that 700 to 800 meters depth through the unconformity. In the past, that has kind of always been a knock on uranium, but I think as uranium comes more to the forefront, we need to start comparing it to other different types of commodities, other different types of mines, right? You look at copper mines or even nickel mines in Canada, they're mining down to 3 kilometers depth. And here we have uranium, which is way more valuable on a per ton basis, and if we're drilling McArthur River sized deposits, nobody's really going to care if it's 800 meters down. And I think with our group, obviously there's certain expenses that come when you are exploring at that deeper level. But I think we really have zero learning curve when it comes to exploring. Right? We've been doing it since the early 2000s. Right? So if you want to put a group that's going to explore it as efficiently as possible, you want a group like us.
When we talk about deep, high-grade deposits, though, and I start thinking about deposits like Arrow, the main thing that pops into my mind is a deposit that hasn't been transacted in a while, and it's ranking up G&A like crazy. So I guess my main thought here would be, who would buy you? I mean, if you find something, let's just assume a couple of years up into the future. Like Cameco doesn't seem to really be looking to spend any money on exploration projects. They've got their own brownfield projects already in need of further work. So they're not spending any money on exploration right now. They don't seem at all focused on exploration. So if it's not Cameco, and you already have a couple of big projects in the basin that are not transacted, who would buy you if you find something?
Yeah, I think, for starters, we'd always take the approach that we are going to, build a project. I think putting your whole strategy on something that's really out of your control is not a great way to run the company. But having said that, I think what you're seeing now is new entrants into the basin, which happens as the uranium price increases, right? Think about last cycle, you had Vale and companies like that are earning in on exploration level projects. You see BHP that's just recently set up an accelerator for uranium and lithium. And BHP is now hiring people in Saskatoon, uranium experts. So I think there is going to be these bigger groups that come as kind of, uranium comes more to the forefront, alongside copper and things like that. So I think there will be optionality for who could potentially take somebody out who does have a discovery. And it might not necessarily have to be a chemical like it has been in the past, right? I think as you see the basin continue to grow, there hasn't really been a producer in the past that hasn't been Cameco or Rano, right? And so as NextGen kind of moves along, maybe Denison and people like that, the whole basin's going to shift because you're going to have new producers, which we have really never seen. And so I think that's going to open things up. I mean, you saw UEC get into the basin. So I think there is a lot of a lot of groups that are sitting on the sidelines that could, as uranium becomes more and more kind of into the spotlight, they'll take a shot.
Mm-hmm. So it not only depends on what you're going to be able to do, it also depends on the uranium cycle itself. Because I mean, if you want to get BHP interested into it, they would get interested if uranium really starts picking up more than it has over the recent past, I guess.
And I think you're seeing that they're already starting to make their move, right?
Mm.
I mean, they're doing the same thing in nickel and things like that, where they've been extremely active. So I think obviously even setting up this accelerator doesn't seem like a huge thing, sure, but it is. It is. They're setting up office in Saskatchewan for uranium, and they're looking to potentially make investment.
All right. All right. Just before I zoom in on the Ursa project here, because that's going to be the interesting one. I just mentioned that you have roughly 5% that you own to your own name of this company. You've also been buying over the recent past. But help me understand: is the bulk of those shares, is that you buying them in the open market? Are those founder shares? Like, sort of, I'm trying to figure out how aligned
combination
with me if I bought right now. Like, so what is your average, I guess?
I would have to get back to you on that one, but it'll be in like the 25-cent range, I would say. 25, 30
It's not a
cent range.
millionth of a penny, basically.
No, exactly. And I think you've seen, right, that I have been buying at 43, 44 and stuff like that, just because, I think it's still such a good deal.
Yeah.
Just to get in that level. And, I'll continue to deploy capital and buy on market. And you've seen it, our whole group, right? I think our management's all been aligned on that front, and we're all just willing to buy on market because, we see it as such a good opportunity to buy at these levels.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of guys with above 1 million shares to their own name, and they do keep buying in the open market. That is a good point. Your presentation also says that there's 20% strategic investors in there. What is that? Like, can you talk to me about who that is, or what groups?
Yeah, so that is, when we raised money at 25 cents after we listed, without having any uranium projects at that point. We had that copper project you mentioned.
Yeah.
And really, we were starting to look at uranium assets, but that was just people who, I've developed relationships over the years that were willing to put in money at that level without us even having the complete team or the assets at that point. And so, I can't list them as under management or advisors because they're not, but they are just people that are close to us and will be cutting checks at, every round. And so it's just people that back us, and, they were generous enough to cut checks when we really had, nothing besides a dream at that point.
Right. So they're basically investing in you because you didn't have. Okay, makes sense. Okay, let's just zoom in on your project. So, I guess you cannot call it a flagship project right now, but the largest one, the Ursa project or Ursa project. I think this one makes up like what, roughly half of your total land package. 40%,
roughly
something like that. Yeah.
No, so Ursa itself, like I said, it is on that Cable Bay shear zone, which is, a crustal level fault. It's the one where we feel like it offers the next great analog to, McArthur River and all those other trends that exist in the east side of the basin. The thing that really attracted it to us was it was drilled in the 80s and 90s, probably about a dozen drill holes, and none of those drill holes intersected the conductor. And so what that told us was that, there is obviously, looking at from geophysics wise, it looks like there should be a conductor there and everything like that, but just shows us that geophysics wasn't up to speed in the 80s and 90s where they could actually target stuff at that depth. What was also interesting was that the few holes that were drilled there, they did hit some uranium mineralization. It is 0.2% over, 0.1, 0.2 meters. Not a huge amount, but that is very important because what it shows you is that the trend is fertile. And you always got to start to think about how are these monster deposits going to show themselves, right? And in the past, when we discovered Hurricane, there was a structure up in the sandstone with a bit of elevated uranium. We projected that down to the unconformity. We hit Hurricane. Our team at Denison, when they discovered Griffin, there was some mineralization there just slightly lower in the basement. At the unconformity, there wasn't a whole bunch of grade. They went down and they hit Griffin. So often you can trace a lot of this mineralization and have success. And so when you start to layer in the different things that this thing had, right, we have 60 kilometers of strike length, right? It's just begging for modern geophysics. So we have fertile trend, never had modern geophysics, optimal target have never been drilled. It just starts stacking up. And so that's exactly why we liked it. And I think, Steve Blower, our chairman, was really, the brainchild of the land package you put together. Steve, I mean, obviously has, I would say, an unmatched track record of success in the basin, having, led the team to discover Griffin at Denison, Hurricane at ISO, and then moving on to 92 Energy. And when ISO Energy sold those assets, helping them as a technical advisor with that. So I think he really said that this is an area where he could foresee that next, great deposit being found.
Okay. So geophysically, there's high conductive corridor.
Yeah.
The rocks below the ground, so the sandstone, the basement rocks are fractured or faulted,
Yep.
meaning there is place for, if there would be uranium, there's place for the uranium to have come up. And then there has been uranium found on there before. Let's say, just say there's uranium in the soil, more or less. I guess we can say that.
It would be deeper in the basement where the uranium is found, so below the unconformity. So there is some. It is, you could consider it a fertile trend.
Okay. What else geologically? I mean, what else do you need? Like if making a uranium deposit was like making a cake, and you have your ingredients list. We have these three ingredients list. What else?
Sure. So I think obviously next we have to do fly some like airborne, right, to map out where these conductors actually are. I think systems have greatly improved in the past. And what you would want to look for is you would first fly some airborne to identify this EM conductor. You would go back in and do some more detailed ground geophysics, because when you're targeting that at that depth, you want to get it as kind of as post small scale as you can. So we'd go in at some ground geophysics, then you would follow that up with drilling. And when you drill, I mean, you're going to hope that you start to see some more structure and alteration in that sandstone. I think past drilling there hasn't seen that alteration in the sandstone yet, but that's a product of them never intersecting the conductor, we believe. And so usually you'll see above these conductors, if you're close to something, you'll see a large alteration halo coming up into the sandstone, which will start giving you signs that, okay, this is looking better for an opportunity to potentially hit some significant uranium here.
Okay. But so when you're flying geophysics, you basically want to see a corridor of high conductivity and low magnetics, mag low.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to be looking for.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think, we're coming to you quite early on in the story here, and, we're not kind of beating around the bush here. We are going to have to do a significant amount of geophysics on this before we drill. And that's just the strategy we have to take, and we're going to do it properly, because when you head out to drill, it is deeper drilling. So we want to make sure that we're targeting as best as we can.
Right. Because you said it's going to be deeper, so it's not going to be cheap holes. So over there, you don't want to waste your money. It makes sense. What's the timeline on that, though? So the geophysics, when do you want to have that done? When do you want to have the bit hitting the ground?
Yeah, so geophysics should be starting here in June. We'll quickly follow that up with ground geophysics later this year, probably in the later fall. And then we'd set ourselves up for a significant drill program in early 2024.
Okay. So the drill's hitting 2024. Okay. Now we'll talk about money here in a second, but I'm also trying to think of some other risks around that. What could go wrong? I'm always looking for a reason to say no, I guess.
I think so. I think, obviously we are targeting deeper, but we do, like I said, have a tremendous amount of experience exploring in all of these areas, how to do it cost effectively. And our VP of exploration, Andy, I say this is the highest compliment. He's cheap, and he figures out ways to get there in a cost effective manner. And, he dreams about this stuff. He wants us to set it up properly, that we can get the most out of our dollars in the ground. I think you see in a inflationary environment like we are now, that you really have to be strategic. And I think backing a management team that has experience exploring is a big thing, right? Because it's pretty easy to go screw up when you've never explored in these areas before. It's pretty easy to spend a lot of money and not get results, not have the contacts to good drilling contractors, good geophysics contractors, good people even bringing in camp, fuel, stuff like that. And we have all of that.
What about the the lake. I believe the Ursa project is sort of on the shores of Creek Lake.
So Cree Lake, yeah, it's a massive lake in the area. We were strategic with putting together a land package to avoid that lake. So no, none of our ground covers that lake. I
Okay.
think, it is an important lake to the area, and I don't really want to be exploring on it, to be honest. I think just want to, yeah,
Okay.
stay away from that, I would say.
So in terms of social permits and First Nations and all that, how do you deal with that? I mean, what's the situation there right now?
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, like we do have a long-standing relationships in that area, obviously with ISO, Denison, NextGen, things like that. So it's been very important to us to kind of get the news story out there. Andy's been really really getting out there and talking to people. I think even ahead of governments kind of going to consult and stuff like that. So we just want to be on our front foot there and make sure that we let them know what we're doing, and let them know that we hope to provide some jobs and opportunities for them to help us out.
Sure, sure. You also staked some ground. You have some staked ground, but you also recently staked some more ground around that project to the east.
Yeah.
You have some to the south, to the northeast as well. What is that like? Is that on the same connectivity corridor, or like how does this acquisition make sense?
Yeah, so Astro was the one you're referring to, which is almost like the trends coming from Ursa extend onto it. And really that's one where, if we are, we're sticking to our theory that Ursa is going to become this district scale thing, it's important to grab every piece of ground in and around it, before we increase that value if we have success. I think you saw Fission do that. You saw NextGen do that, right? Where they have all the pieces in and around their corridor. And it's just, for $25,000, whatever it costed us to put Astro together, now have it protected for 2 years, it just made logical sense to tie off as much of that area as we could.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
then
cool.
obviously, so Charcoal and Castor, those are on different conductive trends. I mean, and those ones are outside of the basin, Charcoal and Castor, so they don't have sandstone cover. Those ones would be going for an arrow style mineralization where it's in the basement rock. Charcoal is an extension of the Collins Bay trend, which hosts Eagle Point Mine for Cameco. And then Castor is extension of what we feel kind of comes up from McLean Lake. And Castor is very interesting because it's been a trend that people have always flagged, but they always felt that there was never a conductor there because I think past geophysics was never able to identify it. So on Castor itself, we ended up flying some geophysics late last year, continued early this year, and right away we found a conductor, which immediately upgraded it because, I mean, obviously, as you know, every mine on the east side of the basin is associated with these conductors.
Yep.
So I think it really upgraded Castor immediately for us.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you just recently flew the V10 Plus, so it's an electromagnetic
Yeah.
survey, showed you moderate to strong conductivity at Castor.
Yeah.
Also a zone, it was over a zone with faults and fractures. So again, the same thing uranium would have had place to climb up. And that conductivity from Castor extended on to Charcoal, if I'm not mistaken.
So Charcoal would be parallel trends. So there's two different conductive trends. Both trends continue off the basin.
But they're separate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Separate trends. Right. I kind of talked about these northeastern trends, obviously the ones that host MacArthur and all these ones.
Yep.
Obviously Charcoal would be an extension of the Collins Bay one, Castor extension of McLean, and then over inside the basin itself, this is where we have what we call the Cable Bay Shear Zone, where we have Ursa. So it's just kind of these long northeastern parallel trends. We've tried to get as much land as we can within these, what we have interpreted as corridors.
Okay. In the news release, you mentioned that you want to do more electromagnetic survey though before you drill them. How come?
Which one? On Charcoal and Castor?
Yes.
Yeah, you do potentially some ground surveying there and also get boots on the ground and prospect it. I think, when you look at how PLS was discovered, right, there was Triple R. You have to go and prospect with scintillometers and things like that and see if you can map boulder terrains and then just trace those back to where you think you could find the deposit. So that one just involves, this is very cost-effective exploration, basically just prospecting guys with scintillometers. And that's the type of exploration you can do when you're outside of the basin, right? When you just have that basement rock, and it's kind of the old school exploration, which led to discoveries of Key Lake, McLean Lake, things like that are more on the fringes of the basin.
Okay. So, but that you expect to drill Castor and Charcoal sooner than Ursa, or how do you see it?
So I think when we started doing the exploration at Charcoal and Castor, that was before we'd pieced together Ursa. So at this point, I would put Ursa at the top of the pile, but it's important, like you mentioned, to not necessarily call something a flagship. I mean, Ursa is what we view as our best project at this point. But if the results aren't showing what we want, then we'll move on to our other projects. It's important to have a pipeline. I think, when we were at ISO Energy, we inherited there's 5 or 6 projects from NextGen when it was spun out. And it wasn't those projects where we found Hurricane. It wasn't the next one we bought Geiger where we found Hurricane. It was the one after that called the Rock East. And I think it's important to know that we are going to take the approach where if it's not yielding results, we're going to drill it and kill it and move on to something else. You have to always keep that pipeline going. That's how you are successful in exploration. You can't be that arrogant just to keep sticking to the same project, trying the same thing if it's not working. You have to move on and you have to keep trying. And that's exactly what we want to do.
Talk to me more about that, because for a $13 million, $14 million market cap company, your portfolio of project isn't small at all. So
yeah.
I understand why that is, but what is your portfolio management strategy? If you like, what criteria would you use to decide whether to park the exploration on the project or progress with it?
It would almost be like a series of stage gate things, right? Like depending on the results of our first pass geophysics, it's cheap, efficient way to do exploration. If our guys don't think that the geophysics have yielded the results we want, then we would focus on a project where the results did yield what we wanted, right? And then the next phase would lead to us drilling. And if drilling's not going the way we want it to, then we might move on to one of our other projects to start drilling. And if that's not yielding what we want, we're always going to make sure that we keep cycling in other projects. And I think it's important to note that we do have that two-pronged approach. We're always valuing other assets we could potentially get. It's value accretive opportunities, right? Like a lot of this ground we staked for $25,000, $30,000. And if we think there's opportunity to continue to add stuff like that, we will. And if some of these projects aren't showing the results we want, and we're pretty confident that it's something we don't want to drill ourselves, then you can look for opportunities to bring in partners. It's very hard to get good ground nowadays. And so us, even maintaining this stuff and then looking for partnership on stuff that we don't necessarily want to explore ourselves, is good opportunities for us.
It's crazy how crowded the Athabasca Basin has gotten of recent past. Like I use juniormininghub.com, which is like a tool where you can see all the different properties and you just open up the map and you see Canada from atop. Even if you don't know where the Athabasca Basin is, you're gonna notice it immediately because it's like just a circle or an ellipsoid, I guess, of white properties around. So it's absolutely crowded. Not so much around you, not so much deep into the basin as we said. You still have plenty of ground there. What about infrastructure, by the way? Now that I'm mentioning it deeper into the basin, how's the infrastructure there?
So we're about 45 kilometers west of McArthur River. There's obviously some lodges and stuff that are in the area there and things like that we can utilize. There has been past exploration there. So, I mean, it helps with permitting to use old campsites and things like that. So it's not really an issue. There has been winter roads that have been built all the way to Centennial Deposit in the past, which is even further west of us. That's Cameco's own Centennial Deposit. So, I mean, people have been active, further west than us, as recent as last year. So it's in a good location as far as access and infrastructure.
But you would have to build an exploration camp yourself if you want to drill Ursa, right?
Yeah, you bring in a temporary camp. It's pretty standard, right? You don't necessarily want to put in a camp until you've had drilling success, like a permanent camp, right? Because otherwise you might move. Say if we have success 10 kilometers away along that trend, you're going to want to put the camp somewhere close to that. So having that, kind of cheaper temporary camps makes a lot more sense until you have that success. Then you can build something that's more permanent based upon that success.
I wish you could go and talk to some of your colleagues who've been building concrete exploration camps before they even found anything worth finding. So that's been happening there, as you would know. The exploration still isn't cheap. I mean,
Yeah,
whatever you do with the camp, you can cut on some expenses. So it's
sure.
definitely not cheap. So I guess money is always a risk. So let's talk about money. How much is 2023 going to cost you, and how much do you have in the bank right now?
So we currently have about 1.5 million in the bank. As I said, we haven't really raised since we did that initial 25-cent hard, 35-cent flow through after we listed, and that was $2 million. And so we've done a good job of conserving cash, right? We haven't really been paying us much along the lines of salaries and things like that at this point.
Mm.
Um, and so airborne, it's kind of 400,000 range. So we do have enough to get this next phase of airborne done on Ursa, and Orion in that area. So, we're good for that first phase of exploration. And then at some point, obviously, we're going to have to add to the treasury. I think there's been a lot of people on the fringes that have been wondering when we're going to do that. I think a lot of uranium funds are interested in the story and, want to come in a meaningful way. So at some point we will do it. But I think, the time's got to be right, and it won't have to be very diluted, right? We don't need $15 million to go and raise it now. It doesn't make sense at these levels, right? There's a chance for us to bring in a certain amount that can set us through to this next drill program. And then at that point, obviously if the tailwinds continue in uranium and we do have some success, there might be another opportunity to do it at, a much higher level.
But I think your network also, based on the people who introduced us. I don't know if it's fair to say or not who, but based on the people who introduced us, I assume your network is deep enough where you can go and
Yeah.
do flow through or charity flow through, because the
Yeah.
deposits are in Canada. The excuse me, not deposits. The projects are in Canada, so you can do flow through, right?
Yeah. And I think obviously that charity flow through is an even bigger advantage, just having to find that back end buyer. And we do have, like I said, a lot of people sitting on the sidelines that would be willing to provide that back end. And then, you're getting 50% premium to your current share price type numbers, on those dollars that are coming in.
Yeah. And if you're lucky, the market works with you. You don't have to do a warrant, or not, at least not a full warrant, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Um, but who you're going to be placing those flow through shares with, right? You know the back end buyer, more or less.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. No, that's important for us, right? To make sure those shares go in hands, and it's important that this round the shares go in hands of people that are going to be cutting checks, as we continue to grow as a company. I think it's the opportunity to bring in very strategic people, you backers, long-term holders of uranium companies, as we continue to grow this story, and they want to kind of continue to buy into what we're doing as a company.
Mm, yeah, that is a sophisticated strategy to do it. Flow through can be dangerous otherwise. You mentioned the burn rate. You mentioned your own salaries. If I was looking at your recent filings, you personally took 15,000 cash for the first quarter of the year, and almost
Yeah.
21,000 in options. That's not too much. Is that expected to remain somewhat similar going forward?
I think once we get the company to a point and bring in some cash, and start exploring on an active level, then at some point I will increase it. But I think you've seen that even that 15 that I've had, I've put more than that back into the market. So I think, I'm obviously not doing this for the
Mm,
salary, and I'm just, continuing. I am incentivized by the amount of shares I have and the amount of money I've put into it. And so I think at some point, obviously, I will need to take a bit of a higher salary, but that's not now.
okay. Okay. Fair point. I also saw in that filing that you started spending some money on marketing. Not a lot. It was some $43,000, which is about it was about a third of what you spend on exploration, which was also, it was 120-ish, 115, 17, something like that. $4,000 for the first quarter of the year. What were those marketing dollars is what I'm thinking about. What were those marketing dollars spent on? And also what is the sort of the budget going forward, exploration versus marketing spend? How do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, that marketing probably would have just been a few conferences and stuff like that where we brought in, like the full team. I think, we were doing even a lot of corporate development work to make sure we got assets we liked, flying to a place like Toronto. Just, sometimes to get deals and stuff across the line, you do have to go there in person and bring the full team. Marketing wise, I think we're really going to take an approach where we do just layer in individual marketing approaches. I don't think it's necessary to put a whole bunch of cash at it and just kind of drive it up for a temporary amount of time. I think what we want to do is just layer in different levels of marketing, like speaking to somebody like you, and then measure the results, and then decide whether we need to keep layering in more and more. But the vast majority of the dollars are going to go to exploration now. I think it is like that's where the value comes, right? Like ISO Energy, obviously that one went from what 30 cents to $6. And the reality is, obviously, there was some decent marketing. It helped to have NextGen as a strategic shareholder. It also helps to drill 80% uranium. Like and so that's exactly where the value comes from, right? And so that's why it will go into the ground. It will go into exploration, and the marketing will come when we have success.
Okay. Okay. Well, it seems like you have a plan for it. I like that. I think I'm all out of questions. What is something that, I guess it's early on to talk about these things, but that's sort of an obligatory question that I ask. What keeps you up at night? Like what worries you when you think about the company going forward?
I don't think it's a worry. I think it's more excitement, to be honest. I think, you know, I just love telling this story. I love the fact that we've been able to essentially bring the entire ISO Energy team back together, the entire discovery team of Hurricane back together. And I'm just really excited to get out there, explore, and spread the message here about what we're trying to do. So I mean, obviously, there will be certain levels of stress that you have as a CEO and things like that. And that just comes with the job. But I mean, the excitement heavily outweighs the worry. I'm really just excited to get this story out there and start exploring.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think I'm all out of questions. Is there something that you came here hoping to talk about, but I'm failing to bring up?
I think, obviously my background as a geologist, I'm more of a technical person. We are kind of on the end of it where we go after discoveries. I think I always use an opportunity to discuss the macro with more experts in space like you, just to kind of get your opinion on it and see where it's going. And then, yeah, so I kind of turn it over to you, to what you see as kind of the near-term catalysts about what could potentially happen to the uranium space here.
Well, here's your first mistake. You call me an expert, which is definitely not true. I mostly spend my own time looking for experts to talk to about uranium. But I guess the consensus when it comes down to the uranium stocks, not the uranium price, because those two things seem not to be too correlated, at least not for the time being, is that as long as liquidity stays out of the market, the uranium stocks are going to suffer. As long as risk is not into the market, the uranium stocks are going to suffer. And what brings risk back into the markets? It might be interest rates cutting, but how long does that? How long does that keep putting fuel onto the fire? And is it followed up by a recession that sort of crushes everything? All these things are a possibility, but certainly in the uranium space, it seems like the bullish fundamentals are stacking on top of each other, and they're not mattering at all, but that doesn't mean they're not there. So there's sort of this belief online, or this thing that everybody says online, that with uranium is slowly, then slowly, and then all at once, because the fundamentals, sort of stack up on top of each other. So that's vague, but
yeah.
That's sort of where I see it. What do you see? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, what you just described there, to me, that seems like an opportunity, right? You have the fundamentals really stacking up, and you have the equities that are extremely undervalued. And a bull market won't just necessarily be like this, right? There'll be ebbs and flows as it continues to go up. And I think, with the uranium market, obviously, when the price went up and the equities followed a little while ago, you probably saw it where investors were looking and they saw, a double on their portfolio, which they hadn't seen in a long, long time. And it's hard not to, take a bit of a win when that's happening, when everything else is kind of depressed. And so I think you probably saw maybe somewhat get a little bit ahead of itself, but also just saw people take some cash off the table when they saw that opportunity. But that just, like I said, I think that just provides opportunity for people to enter the space now and just I think you just always got to stick with your gut instinct, stick with your thesis, whatever you want to do, and just ride out these little waves because, and at the end, it'll pay off for you if you're a believer in this uranium bull market.
It's also important to pick high quality companies though, because I was doing it the other way around last year. I didn't care much about the quality of the company as much as I cared about the size of the market cap, which is to say I
Yeah.
wanted low market cap companies, didn't care much about anything else, and I got burned really hard on it. So it matters, it absolutely matters what companies you pick, because dilution risk is going to be a big thing.
Yeah.
Does the company have enough cash to keep their heads down and keep working, not having to dilute you too much while everything is going down? Because if uranium stocks catch a bid in a risk off environment, which means that they would be going up for a certain period of time in a macro environment that isn't as favorable, a lot of people will be taking profits sooner than you might expect. Stocks might start going
Yeah.
back down. Companies might have to raise again, diluting and hurting and so on and so forth. It starts like a cycle. So what I'm trying to say here is that quality matters.
Mm-hmm.
Doing more research matters. Understanding what you're holding and building conviction in what you're holding absolutely matters. So like conversations like these are great, and I absolutely appreciate your time and telling me about the company. But it's not everything. People need to do more research, and they
Yeah.
need to rely on just reading more. I mean, you provide enough information in your MD&A to understand the company and stuff like that. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think, if you were able to back the next gens, ISOs, and things like that during this past cycle, you'd have made more than necessarily following a 2 cent stock, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think so that is true, and I think you have to diversify somewhat. You can invest in a next gen, a chemical, and things like that. And if you have some risk capital, then you can start going down to the junior level space because those can sometimes give you those biggest returns. And then I would obviously a group like Cosa, where we have a management team that does have that level of success. I think we should be closer to the top of that list, but obviously do your own due diligence and see if that makes sense for you.
Mm. Yeah, in your slightly biased opinion.
Slightly biased for sure.
I appreciate you, Keith. Thank you for sitting down with me. I will be looking forward to doing another update with you soon when you start doing the geophysical work and you start getting something back. But for now, yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Antonio.